Hello, my name is Brenda. I'm 60 years old, and I want to share a story that turned my world upside down. When my husband had a stroke at 60, my children insisted I sell the 7 motorcycles collecting dust in our garage. They called them junk, useless pieces of metal that my husband had spent decades caring for. I felt torn. My husband lay unconscious in the hospital, and my family's pressure made it impossible to say no, even though my heart ached every time I thought about selling what he loved. Then one morning, everything changed. A group of tattooed bikers appeared at my door, and I realized I had no idea who my husband really was. Bear, their leader, calmly explained that the quiet mechanic my children mocked was actually a legend in the biker world. The motorcycles we had sold weren't just bikes. They contained something extremely valuable that criminals were desperately searching for. My heart sank as I understood the danger my husband was in, still unconscious and unaware in his hospital bed, and the weight of responsibility fell entirely on me. I had no choice but to step into a world I didn't understand, facing danger and secrets my husband had carried alone for decades. Each decision became critical, and fear had no room to stop me. As I followed the bikers and uncovered the truth, I realized the man I thought I knew was a hero in ways I could never have imagined. But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading the comments and knowing where you are. Now, let's see how this incredible story truly began. The smell of old oil and rust still lived in our garage, thick and familiar, like a memory that refused to fade. I stood in the doorway, my hands trembling slightly as Derek paced back and forth, the sharp sound of his boots echoing against the concrete floor. "Mom, Dad's junk has to go," he said, voice firm, almost cold. "He's in a coma. We need money. The medical bills are piling up." I stared at him, not recognizing the tone. It was the voice of a man who had buried his softness beneath practicality, who couldn't afford to feel too much. But he was still my son. "It's not junk," I whispered. "He loved these bikes, Derek, every single one." Lisa, my daughter, leaned against the workbench, arms crossed, her expression hard but her eyes glistening. "Mom, look around. He wasted his life in here. All those weekends, all those nights. For what? He never took a vacation, never saved for retirement. These are just old motorcycles. Worthless." Her words landed like stones on my chest. I wanted to defend him, to defend the man who used to come home with grease under his nails and a smile that reached his eyes whenever he talked about just one more project. But the hospital had called that morning. Another surgery, more costs. I could feel the walls closing in. I walked slowly to the far corner of the garage where the 1972 Harley sat under a dusty tarp. My fingers brushed the chrome, cool and silent. "He loved them," I said again, softer this time, almost to myself. He said each one had a story. Derek sighed, impatient. "Mom, he was a failure. Accept it. We have to move on." I turned to look at him, my throat tight. "Don't you dare talk about your father that way," I said, but the conviction in my voice faltered. The man who once roared down the road with the sun behind him was now lying in a hospital bed, machines breathing for him. Maybe to Derek that did look like failure. The silence that followed was heavy. I felt trapped between two lives, the one I had built with Frank and the one my children were now forcing me to step into without him. Against every instinct screaming inside me, I nodded. "Fine. Sell them." Derek didn't hesitate. Within days, he found a buyer and sold all 7 of Frank's motorcycles for $8,000. $8,000 for 30 years of dreams, sweat, and love. I didn't even go to the sale. I couldn't bear to see strangers touch what had been sacred to him. That night, I went to the hospital. The steady rhythm of the machines surrounded me, the quiet beep of the heart monitor almost hypnotic. I sat beside Frank's bed and held his hand. His skin was cool, pale. The doctors said he couldn't hear me, but I spoke anyway. "They're gone, Frank," I whispered. "The bikes. I'm sorry, I didn't know what else to do." A single tear slid down my cheek, landing on his wrist. I brushed it away quickly, ashamed, as if even my sorrow might disturb his rest. And then, maybe it was the light, maybe it was my imagination, but I saw something, a tear, rolling slowly from the corner of his closed eye. I gasped. "Frank?" I leaned closer, heart racing. His eyelids didn't move, but I knew what I saw. He heard me. Somewhere, deep inside that motionless body, he heard me. I stayed by his side for hours, whispering apologies into the sterile air until my voice was hoarse. By the time I drove home, dawn was breaking, painting the horizon in shades of soft pink and gray. The world felt strangely empty without the hum of his garage, without the man who had filled it with laughter and life. 2 days later, I was making coffee when I heard the sound, deep, guttural, unmistakable. Motorcycles, not one, but many. The kind of synchronized rumble that made the windows vibrate. I froze, cup in hand, as the noise grew louder, closer, until it stopped right outside my house. I stepped to the window. 12 men, all dressed in leather and denim, their faces weathered by wind and time, stood in formation on my driveway. Their bikes gleamed under the morning sun, polished chrome reflecting light like fire. My heart pounded. I opened the door before they could knock. The man in front removed his helmet. His beard was streaked with gray, his eyes sharp yet kind. "Mrs. Patterson?" he said, voice deep and steady. "Yes," I managed. "My name's Bear," he said. "We need to talk about Frank, now." There was something about the way he said it, firm but not threatening, that sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't asking. He was informing. Behind him, the other riders waited in silence, their faces solemn. I looked from one to the other, confused and frightened. "Talk about Frank? I don't understand. Are you friends of his?" Bear exchanged a glance with a woman among them, a silver-haired biker with eyes full of quiet sorrow. She gave a small nod. "Please," Bear said. "May we come in?" I hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. They filed into my living room one by one, filling the space with the faint scent of gasoline and leather. I clutched my coffee mug like a shield. Bear removed his gloves and sat down. "I'm sorry to come unannounced, Mrs. Patterson, but time is important. We've been trying to reach Frank for weeks. When we heard about his accident, we didn't know if it was true." "It's true," I said quietly. "He had a stroke 3 weeks ago. He's still unconscious." Bear's jaw tightened. The woman, Maggie I would later learn, lowered her head. "He's a good man," she said softly. I frowned, unsettled. "I don't understand. How do you know him?" Bear leaned forward. "Frank Patterson isn't just some mechanic tinkering in his garage. He's the founder of the Iron Angels Motorcycle Club." I blinked. "The what?" He nodded slowly. "The Iron Angels, a biker organization that's raised over $2 million for children's hospitals, rehab centers, veterans. Frank started it 30 years ago." I stared at him, unable to process the words. "No, you must be mistaken. He just fixed bikes. He barely went anywhere." Maggie met my eyes, and there was something almost maternal in her expression. "He told you what you needed to believe. He wanted to keep you safe from the dangers that came with the rest." I felt the room spin. My knees went weak, and I sank into a chair. Frank, a founder, a leader, the man I'd called a dreamer, a fool for spending too much time in his garage, had been running a charitable motorcycle club behind my back. Bear looked at me gently. "Mrs. Patterson, those bikes your son sold, they weren't just machines. They were custom builds for charity auctions, worth over $400,000. I froze. My stomach churned. "He sold them for 8, I whispered. The room fell silent. Bear's expression hardened, but his voice stayed calm. Then we have a bigger problem. One of those bikes contained something else, something Frank hid, evidence against a man named Viktor Kozlov. Kozlov, I repeated, barely able to form the word. A human trafficker, Maggie said grimly. Frank was working with us to get proof to the FBI, documents worth millions to the people involved. My pulse thundered in my ears. Documents? Inside the bikes? Bear nodded. We were supposed to meet him next week. He never showed. Now we know why. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. Derek. I answered. His voice was panicked. Mom, some scary guys came to my house asking about the bikes. What's going on? I looked up, my heart in my throat. Derek, listen to me. Don't talk to anyone else. Lock the doors. I'm coming over, he started, but I hung up. When I turned back, all 12 bikers were watching me. I need to find those motorcycles, I said, my voice trembling but resolute. Bear studied me for a long moment. Kozlov's people are killers, Brenda. This isn't a game. Then we better move fast, I said, standing up and grabbing my coat, because I won't let them destroy what's left of my husband's life. When Bear handed me his phone, I didn't know what to expect. I thought maybe photos, old memories, something that would explain why 12 strangers had shown up on my doorstep asking about my husband. But what I saw on that small, cracked screen changed everything I thought I knew about the man I married. The first headline read, $2 million raised by local motorcycle club to support children's hospitals. The second one, Iron Angels Save Youth Center from closure. Each article had a photo, men and women in leather jackets standing proudly beside rows of shining motorcycles, smiling children gathered around them. And there, in the background of one picture, partly hidden by sunlight, was Frank. My Frank. His familiar slouched posture, his faded cap. I blinked hard, as if that would make the image vanish, as if the truth could still be undone. Bear's voice was low but steady. Frank founded the Iron Angels 30 years ago, he said. He's our leader. The words didn't make sense. They hung in the air, heavy and impossible. No, I whispered. That's not... He just fixed bikes in the garage. He was always there, tinkering. That's all he did. Maggie, the silver-haired woman who had barely spoken until now, leaned forward, her eyes soft, her smile tinged with sadness. He wasn't tinkering, sweetheart. Those bikes were masterpieces. He built them for charity auctions, custom frames, hand-polished chrome, engines that sang. Each one was worth at least $50,000-$60,000. Together, over $400,000. My mouth went dry. 400. I couldn't finish. My stomach twisted. Derek sold them for $8,000, I said finally, my voice cracking. He said we needed money. I let him. Oh God, what have we done? The room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Maggie looked away, tears glinting in her eyes. Bear's jaw tightened. He took a deep breath, as if weighing how much more truth I could bear. There's more, he said grimly. Frank hid something inside one of those bikes. Evidence, against a man named Viktor Kozlov. I frowned, confusion cutting through my grief. Evidence? What kind of evidence? Bear's gaze hardened. Documents, names, transactions. Kozlov runs a trafficking ring. Frank's been working with us and the FBI to bring him down. My pulse quickened. Trafficking? You mean human trafficking? My voice shook. Frank was involved in that? He was trying to stop it, Maggie said softly. Kozlov's people launder money through fake import businesses. Frank found proof, shipping routes, photos, bank records. He hid the data inside one of his bikes just until the FBI could pick it up. They were coming next week. My world tilted. The quiet life I thought I'd been living, our little house, our simple routines, was a mask. Beneath it was danger, courage, sacrifice, and I hadn't seen any of it. I covered my face with my hands, my chest tightening. He never told me. He never said a word. He couldn't, Bear said gently. It was too dangerous. Kozlov has people everywhere. If they knew Frank had the files. He trailed off, but I understood. The image of my husband lying pale and motionless in the hospital bed returned to me, and for the first time I wondered, was his stroke really just a stroke? Before I could ask, my phone started ringing again. Derek. His name flashed across the screen, the letters blurring as my eyes filled with tears. I answered. Derek, what is it? His voice came through shaky, frantic. Mom, I don't know what's happening. Some guys showed up at my house. They were huge, covered in tattoos, asking about Dad's bikes. They said something about needing them back. I locked the doors. Are they friends of Dad's? What's going on? Fear gripped me so tightly it hurt to breathe. Derek, listen to me carefully. Don't open the door to anyone. Stay inside. Call Lisa. Make sure she's safe, too. Mom, what are you talking about? Who are these people? I could hear his panic rising, the sound of drawers opening and closing, his breath quick and uneven. Just do as I say, I shouted, my own voice breaking. Don't talk to anyone and don't leave the house. Mom? I hung up. My hand was shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone. Bear was already on his feet. Kozlov's people, he said. They're looking for the evidence. I stood too, my body trembling, but my mind suddenly clear. Then we need to find those motorcycles before they do. Maggie glanced at Bear, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Brenda, it's not that simple. Those bikes could be anywhere by now. And Kozlov's men, they don't just threaten, they destroy. I turned to her, my heart pounding. My husband risked his life to protect that evidence. He believed in something bigger than himself, and I mocked him for it. I called it a waste of time. I won't stand by and let his legacy be erased. Bear studied me for a long moment. His expression softened, though his eyes were still clouded with worry. Kozlov's people are killers, Brenda, he said quietly. You don't know what you're stepping into. I met his gaze, the fear inside me hardening into something else. Resolve. Then we'd better move fast, I said, grabbing my coat from the chair, because I'm not losing him twice. The bikers exchanged glances, surprised, perhaps even impressed. I could see in their faces that they hadn't expected much from me, this middle-aged woman with shaking hands and tear-streaked cheeks. But I wasn't the same woman I'd been that morning. Something inside me had shifted. We walked out of my house together, the sunlight sharp against the chrome of their bikes. The roar of their engines filled the air again, but this time it didn't frighten me. It felt like a call to action, a heartbeat made of metal and thunder. Bear handed me a helmet. Stay close, he said, and whatever happens, do not let them see you as weak. I took the helmet, my fingers trembling as I fastened the strap under my chin. I'm not weak, I said quietly. Just scared. There's a difference. He nodded once. That's what makes you brave. As the engine started and the world blurred into motion, I held on tight, both to Bear's jacket and to the sudden terrifying realization that everything I thought I knew about my husband, about my life, had been a lie. But not a cruel one, a protective one. A secret built not from deceit, but from love. And as we sped down the highway, wind whipping through my hair, I whispered to myself, "Hold on, Frank. I'm coming for you, for your truth, for your legacy." The dealer's shop smelled like gasoline and sunlight, that odd warm mix of oil, metal, and old paper that always made my chest ache with memory. Tommy Chen wiped his palms on his shirt as we walked through the door. The sweat on his forehead caught the light like a small, ashamed mirror. He was younger than I expected, nervous in a way that made his hands fidgety. When he saw the bikers behind me, the color drained from his face. "I sold them already," he blurted, voice trembling, to different buyers. The words came out like a prayer or an accusation. I couldn't tell which. Bear didn't move. He stared at Tommy, not unkindly, but with the kind of focused patience that made you want to answer every question the right way. "Which buyers?" he asked. Tommy swallowed. 3 went to a collector in Phoenix, 2 to a garage in Reno, 2 to— "Oh no," he said, and his eyes flicked sideways as if the last words might bite him. Bear's hand tightened on the back of my coat, steadying me without a word. "What?" he demanded, and even in his clipped tone I could hear worry. Tommy's mouth worked for a moment. 2 went to Dmitry Volkov. He's tied to some Russian buyers. I didn't know." He looked like he wanted to crawl under the nearest workbench and hide. My blood ran cold in a way that felt like the first winter I ever remembered. Sudden, sharp, inevitable. Dmitry Volkov. The name had been spoken in the biker's living room like a threat wrapped in syllables. Kozlov's cousin. Someone who didn't mind using teeth and iron to get what he wanted. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The world around me hummed with the shop's old radio, the rattle of a fan, the soft clink of tools. Derek's face flashed through my mind, the way he'd sold the bikes, the $8,000 receipt like a slap. I felt suddenly foolish, small, helpless. But Bear's voice cut through that haze. "We need the other addresses now," he said. He turned to the others, issuing orders with a quiet efficiency that made my stomach both ache and cling to hope. We split up. Brenda comes with me to Reno. Reno felt like a long time away, though it was only a few hours on the road. I sat behind Bear on the bike, the leather warm and vibrating under my hands, the wind pressing our thoughts together. The highway stretched like a ribbon, and I watched the landscape blur, fields turning into scrub, then the skyline of somewhere unfamiliar. Bear talked, and at first I listened to the cadence of his voice more than his words. "He saved my life," he said after a while, quietly, like confessing a prayer. 15 years ago I was done, addiction, homeless, empty. Frank found me on a back road for God's sake, pulled me into his garage, fed me, gave me a wrench and a job, gave me purpose. Tears came without permission, hot and embarrassing. I blinked them away, stunned at the images forming in my mind. The shy, shirtless man I married handing a greasy rag to a broken man and saying, "You can do this." The small kindness that becomes a lifeline. "Why didn't he tell me?" I asked, my voice small and raw. Bear looked at me, and for the first time, something softened in his hard features. "He thought he was protecting you," he said simply. "He thought if you knew, Kozlov would hurt you, or use you. He kept 2 lives, the one at home and the one he gave away, separate. He wanted to keep you safe." Maggie from the back seat added, "He loved you enough to lie about what he did. That's a strange kind of devotion." The words landed like both a condemnation and a benediction. Protection had been his armor. Secrecy had been his sacrifice. I felt betrayed and blessed all at once, and the contradiction made me dizzy. We reached Reno under a sky that threatened rain, but never quite committed. The garage we were directed to was a low, brick place that smelled of charcoal and old smoke. The owner met us with a face that had seen too many hard years. His hands were calloused and his jaw tight. "Some Russians came yesterday," he said without preamble, "took the bikes by force." The sentence broke something inside me with the clean, cruel snap of a twig. "By force?" I echoed, unable to imagine how anyone could take the gentle, deliberate work of Frank and reduce it to theft. "They came at night," the owner said. 2 men, big, tore through the locks. The bikes were ready to be shipped, collectors, auctions. I tried to stop them. They didn't care. My stomach rolled. I had been clinging to the belief that perhaps someone had bought the bikes honestly, that maybe, in the hands of respectful owners, Frank's work would be appreciated and preserved. The idea that men had simply stolen and destroyed what he had built felt like sacrilege. My phone buzzed then, and for a moment I welcomed the distraction. The message that lit the screen was from an unknown number. "We have what Frank hid. Stop looking, or he dies in that hospital bed." The text was short, mechanical, like the cold precision of someone who knew how to slice a life into manageable parts. The words did not ask, they commanded. My hands went numb. The air in the garage felt suddenly too thin. I called the hospital with shaking fingers, each ring a small hammer on my ribs. A secretary answered at first, calm, routine, until I asked for Frank's room number and was told it had been changed. "Protective custody," she said, using those official empty words, "for his safety." My voice was small when I said, "They moved him without telling me." There was a pause, the kind that suggests people are checking notes and protocols, and then a line of rehearsed sympathy. "We had to. There's been a threat. It's for his protection, Mrs. Patterson." "They got to him," I breathed before I could stop myself. The truth of it landed like a stone. I'd been walking in circles, clutching at scraps, while the tide had quietly receded and taken the shore with it. The people who wanted Frank's work, the documents he had tucked away like a secret seed, had already reached out, and now they had him in their sights. Bear's hand found mine and squeezed. "We're not letting them touch him," he said. His voice was steady, but the tremor under it was real. "Not if we can stop them." I hated the tremor. I hated how much I wanted to curl into a puddle of helplessness. But the man who had given purpose to lost souls had once looked at me and showed me the world through a half-smile. He had done hard things quietly. Now it was my turn to do something that mattered. As we prepared to leave, Maggie leaned in and brushed my cheek with the back of her hand like a benediction. "Brenda," she whispered, "we'll find them. We'll find the bikes. We'll find what he hid." The promise wrapped itself around me like a cloak, not made of iron, but of people who had been given a second chance and now offered it to someone else. It was fragile and fierce all at once. We climbed back on the bikes. The road ahead felt less like an escape and more like a path I had chosen to walk. There was fear, yes, but threaded through it was something like resolve, and in that resolve, the first small, trembling seeds of hope. The night before we made the plan, I sat alone in the motel bathroom, the light above the mirror flickering in tired pulses. My reflection looked older than I remembered, eyes swollen from too little sleep, lips pressed together as if holding back a confession. My hand trembled as I touched the wedding band that never left my finger. I whispered to the air, as if Frank could hear me through the hum of distance and fear. "I'll bring it all back, love. Everything they took." When I walked out, Bear and Maggie were seated at the small table, a map unfolded between them, covered in circles and arrows drawn in red ink. It looked like a war plan. Maybe it was. "We need to draw them out," I said, before either of them could start talking strategy. The words surprised me by how steady they sounded. "Use me as bait." Bear looked up, his expression tightening. "Absolutely not," he said. "Too dangerous. Kozlov's people don't negotiate. They eliminate." I took a breath and forced myself to meet his eyes. "Frank would do it for any of you," I said quietly. "I'm doing this." Silence filled the room like water. Maggie's gaze softened first, something maternal flickering across her face. Bear rubbed the back of his neck, pacing once, twice, before exhaling hard. "You remind me of him, you know that?" he muttered finally. "Stubborn as hell." We set the trap for the following afternoon, a meeting arranged through a contact who owed the Iron Angels a favor. I'd pretend to be desperate, willing to buy back one specific bike, the 1969 Triumph, Frank's favorite. It was the one he'd spent months restoring after we married, saying it reminded him of freedom before the bills, before the responsibilities, before me. He'd laugh when he said that last part, but I always wondered how much truth hid in his laughter. The warehouse was on the edge of town, surrounded by the kind of silence that comes with danger. Not peaceful, not still, just waiting. The windows were boarded up, and every sound echoed longer than it should have. Bear stayed outside, disguised among a line of motorcycles, his earpiece crackling faintly in my ear. Maggie was posted further back, watching through binoculars. When Dmitry Volkov appeared, the air in the room shifted. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had never been told no. His suit was too perfect for the setting, deep gray, expensive fabric that seemed to mock the dust around us. 3 men followed him, their jackets bulging with the unmistakable outline of weapons. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, his accent thick but his tone almost amused. "Your husband is quite an interesting man." My throat tightened, but I forced a smile. "I'm not here to talk about my husband," I said evenly. "I want the triumph. Name your price." He studied me, head tilted slightly, eyes sharp and pale. "Why this one?" he asked, like a teacher testing a student who didn't know the answer. "Sentimental value," I lied. "He built it before our daughter was born. I just want it back." He laughed, a deep, humorless sound that rolled through the warehouse. "You think I am stupid?" he said, stepping closer. "I know something is hidden in these bikes. I will find it." The echo of his words filled the empty space, bouncing against the metal walls until it felt like the air itself accused me of knowing more. My pulse hammered so hard I could barely hear the static in my earpiece. "Then you don't need me," I said finally, turning toward the door, praying Bear understood the cue that it was time to pull me out. "Wait," Dmitry said, his hand shooting out. His fingers clamped around my arm, cold and strong. "Maybe we make deal, yes? You tell me which bike holds what I seek, and I let your husband live." The world narrowed into that touch, his grip, the glint of his ring, the faint smell of smoke and cologne. My skin crawled, but I forced myself to look him in the eye. "The triumph," I said softly. For a moment, silence. Then that awful, knowing smile spread across his face. "We'll see," he said. "Go home, grandmother. I'll call you." He released my arm with a dismissive flick, like I was something fragile he'd grown bored of breaking. Outside, Bear was already pacing. When he saw me, his jaw tightened. "You told him," he hissed. I pulled my arm free from his grip and met his fury with quiet certainty. "I lied," I said calmly. "It's not in the Triumph. It's in the 1975 Kawasaki." Maggie's sharp laugh cut through the tension. "You clever woman," she said, pride shining behind her tired eyes. "Frank would have loved that." The relief in Bear's face came slow, like a man thawing after a long freeze. "You could have told me," he muttered. "I needed it to sound real," I said simply. "He would have seen through anything rehearsed. He's a predator. You have to let them think they've already won." That night, the motel was quieter than usual. The hum of the neon sign outside seeped through the curtains, painting the room in ghostly blue. I sat on the edge of the bed, Frank's old leather jacket around my shoulders. It still smelled faintly like motor oil and cedar, the scent that used to cling to our kitchen whenever he came home late. I let the tears come then, silent and stubborn, because I was tired of holding them back. The phone rang just as I was drifting into a fragile kind of half-sleep. Lisa's name flashed on the screen. My heart stuttered. My daughter never called this late. "Mom," she sobbed as soon as I answered. "Someone broke into my house." I sat up, the blanket falling to the floor. "What? Lisa, are you hurt? Did you call the police?" "They didn't take anything," she said, her voice trembling. "They just left something." "What did they leave?" There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven. Then she whispered, "A note. It says, 'Your mother is making dangerous mistakes.'" The words hit harder than any threat I'd heard before. I felt every beat of my heart like a warning bell. Bear came to the doorway when he saw my face. "What happened?" he asked. "They know who she is," I said softly, the phone still pressed to my ear. They know who my daughter is." The air between us went still. I could see the guilt forming in Bear's eyes, the same guilt that had lived in mine for weeks. We'd thought we were the ones in control of this game, the ones setting traps, but we'd just been walking in circles while they watched from the dark. "We'll move her," Bear said after a moment. "Get her somewhere safe." I nodded, though safety felt like an illusion now, something that used to exist in another lifetime, when threats were words and not people. After I hung up, I walked outside into the cool Nevada night. The stars were bright, brutal things overhead. I thought of Frank lying in that hospital bed, somewhere under the sterile hum of machines, unaware of how close the darkness had come. I closed my eyes and let the desert wind sting my cheeks. I wasn't fearless. I was a mother, a wife, a woman who had lost too much to let the rest slip away quietly. The fear would stay, but so would the fire. And in that fragile balance, I found the first whisper of something I hadn't felt in weeks: determination, and the unshakable promise that this wasn't the end. I don't remember steering the car so much as feeling the steering wheel through the heat of my palms and the roar of my heart in my ears. The road to Lisa's house felt too short and too long all at once, each mile a thud against the panic that had taken residence in my chest. When I pulled into her driveway, she was on the porch, clutching the two little ones to her chest like they were the last warm things left in the world. Her hair was a mess, her eyes rimmed red, and the way she folded herself around them made me taste metal at the back of my throat. "Mom," she said before I could speak. The single word was raw, a question and a plea braided together. Her voice had that thin tremor new to mothers who'd been forced into fear. "They're terrifying. They broke in. They left a note. They said my mother is making dangerous mistakes." I did the only thing that felt right. I crossed the small yard in 2 quick steps and wrapped my arms around them all. The kids buried their faces in my jacket, their small bodies trembling. I ran a hand through Lisa's hair and felt the trembling in her shoulders, the tremor of a woman who had finally seen the world shift beneath her feet. We went inside because the house felt safer with doors closed. She sat at the kitchen table with her mug of tea untouched, the steam long gone. Her fingers fiddled with the ceramic as if gripping it harder could keep her from unraveling. "Mom," she asked again, softer this time. "What's happening? Derek said Dad was in some biker gang?" The question hurt in a fresh way. Derek's words had been flung like stones. Now they ricocheted against everything we had been. I sat in front of her and took a breath that felt like a promise. "Sit down," I said. "I need to tell you everything." So I did. I told her about the bikers who'd come to my house like a storm, about Bear and Maggie, about the Iron Angels and the articles on Bear's phone. I told her how Frank had quietly built motorcycles for charity auctions and how Derek had sold the 7 bikes for $8,000 because he thought they were worthless. I told her about Kozlov and the evidence Frank had hidden. I told her how the FBI had been due to pick up files and how Dmitry Volkov, Kozlov's cousin, had already been connected to 2 of the bikes. I told her about the note that had said, "We have what Frank hid. Stop looking or he dies." By the end, Lisa's face had broken into something like a map of grief. Her cheeks crumpled, and she made that sound that is half a sob and half a laugh when the pieces of your life don't fit together anymore. "We sold Dad's legacy for nothing," she said, and it was as if someone had kicked the chair out from under her. "We called him a failure. We laughed. We told him he was wasting his life." "You didn't know," I said, my voice soft, even as anger burned under my ribs like coals. The truth kinked in my throat. How could I be angry that they had failed to see him when I had lived with him day after day and still only scratched the surface of what he carried? "You didn't know the things he did in secret to help people. He kept it small because he thought it would keep us safe." Lisa's hands tightened on the mug until it creaked. "I knew he was a good man," she whispered, and then the dam broke. I stopped believing in him. I got tired of waiting for him to be the man I thought he should be. I thought he preferred the garage to us. She buried her face in her hands, and I watched a woman I'd raised become someone raw with regret. The sound she made was a confession that had been waiting too long to be said. Then Derek came in like a gust of bad weather. He slammed the screen door hard enough that the window rattled, shoulders hunched in a familiar defensive posture. "This isn't our fault," he said, hands out, words jagged. "Dad kept secrets. He should have told us. He left us with nothing but problems." I looked at him and felt a hollow place open that I hadn't known existed. "Dad saved lives while you mocked him," I said, cold and precise. The sentence felt like an incision. It cut through the excuses into something cleaner and truer. Now help or leave. Derek's face flushed with a dozen emotions: guilt, anger, embarrassment, a complicated storm. He opened his mouth and then slammed it shut. He left, the door slamming with finality, the sound echoing in the kitchen like a verdict. As he drove away, the house seemed to tilt on its axis for a moment, the silence after him heavy and accusing. Lisa wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked at me with a clarity carved out of pain. "What do you need, Mom?" she asked. The question was simple, but it carried everything: an offer, an apology, a reaching toward repair. I told her what I needed. Find out everything about the Phoenix collector who bought 3 bikes. Use your legal connections, I said. Her forehead creased. She was a lawyer in the way she thought, precise, methodical. It was the right place to start. Marcus Webb, I added, saying the name like a charm that might unlock something. He paid a lot. We need to know who he is, who he's connected to, whether he bought them in good faith. She nodded, wiped her eyes, and pulled out her phone as if the act of searching steadied her. The small domestic rhythm of calling people, making lists, gave us both something to hold on to. My phone buzzed then. Bear's name flashed on the screen. Dimitri tore apart the Triumph, he said straight away, breathless over the line, anger and frustration coiled in every syllable. Found nothing. He's angry. He's tearing through everything he can. It's bad, Brenda. It's bad. I let Bear's words sink in. I imagined Dimitri, hands like hammers, prying metal apart the way men try to pry truth out of things, violent and impatient. It was a grotesque parody of repair, destruction, masquerading as discovery. Then my phone vibrated with another message. This one was a video. For a moment I ignored it because my hands were full with the calming ritual of paperwork, and my head was full of too many images of Frank in hospital beds and carved-up bikes. But Lisa tapped my arm, and her face went white. The video was short, shaky camera work, the kind of grainy footage phones make when pressed into service for fear. Men in thick jackets stood around a hospital room. The frame trembled, then landed on a monitor that beeped in the background. I could see Frank's bed, the sheet pulled taut, the contours of his body too still. The men spoke in voices I couldn't quite make out, a low murmur. Then words in English, thick with accent, unmistakable and brutal. "You have 48 hours to tell us which bike, or we finish what the stroke started." The air left me in a quiet rush. For a second, I felt as if someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. Lisa was whispering something I couldn't hear, some solution like, "Call the police," or "We need to go to them," her jaw working, her hands shaking. I pressed the phone hard into my palm until the screen hurt. 48 hours. The number sat on my tongue like a verdict. I thought of Frank, remote and small in the clinical strip of the video, and felt the truth of what we were up against. Not just greed, not just men with too many weapons, but a cruelty that could wear down bone and hope. I thought of the Iron Angels, their faces lit with the same fierce protectiveness that had brought them to my door. I thought of Derek, who had slammed the door in a moment of cowardice but might find his courage yet. I thought of Lisa's children huddled under blankets. I held Lisa's hand until my fingers cramped. "We have 48 hours, I said, voice steady because it had to be. "But they don't get to finish this. not while any of us can stand." She looked at me like she'd been given a lifeline. The fear in her eyes didn't disappear. It simply changed shape, sharpening into something that could be focused. "What do we do?" she asked. I didn't answer with plans. I answered with something older and stronger. "We move," I said. "We find the bikes, we find the evidence, and we bring it to the people who can hold them safe. We keep Frank alive. We keep his work alive. We make him proud." That night, when the house finally settled and the kids were asleep, Lisa and I sat at the table with a stack of papers and a laptop and the thin glow from the screen casting our faces into sharper relief. We made lists. We called contacts. We argued and reconciled and planned in the same breath. The hours slipped away. Outside, the world continued, indifferent, unknowing. Inside our small kitchen, we clawed back something precious, a sense of purpose, of reparation. It wouldn't undo the sale, or the treachery, or the fear, but it could start to stitch the seams. And when morning came, heavy and bright, I felt the fragile stirrings of something like courage again. It bent me, but did not break me. I had been a woman who had loved quietly for 35 years. Now I had become a woman who had to fight quietly on his behalf. The two were not opposed. They were, I decided, the same thing. We landed in Phoenix just before sunset, the city glowing like molten copper beneath the desert sky. It felt strange, being so far from the quiet roads of our small town, where every corner still smelled faintly of Frank, of oil, leather, and summer dust. Lisa walked beside me through the terminal, her pace quick, but her eyes distant. We didn't speak much. There were no words left big enough to fill the silence between a mother and daughter who had both lost faith in the same man and were now fighting to reclaim it. Bear waited outside in a rented van, his expression carved in stone. Maggie sat in the back seat, her silver hair tied up under a worn leather bandana, her hands resting calmly in her lap. It was strange how her serenity always soothed me, even when my heart was trembling like a trapped bird. The address Lisa had found led us to a mansion-sized property surrounded by palm trees and iron gates. A man greeted us in the driveway, tall, tanned, with the kind of confidence that comes from money earned, not inherited. Marcus Webb. His eyes, though, told a different story, the kind that had seen enough of life's betrayals to still recognize truth when it knocked on his door. "I paid $150,000 for 3 of them," he said, motioning us inside a massive garage that gleamed under white fluorescent lights. Whoever built these machines, he wasn't just a mechanic, he was an artist. I swallowed hard, my throat thick. He was my husband. Marcus turned to me, surprise flickering across his face. "Then you should be proud, Mrs. Patterson. These bikes are perfection." But pride wasn't what I felt. It was something heavier, guilt, love, a grief that pulsed like an open wound. Bear stepped forward, his deep voice breaking the tension. "We need to inspect them, Marcus. One of these bikes hides something important. Evidence. If we find it, we can stop some very bad men." Marcus hesitated only a second before nodding. "Then let's not waste time." For hours we searched, carefully unscrewing panels, running our hands along the chrome frames, tapping for hollow sounds. Every clang echoed through the sterile space like a heartbeat. I moved from one bike to another, my fingers trembling as they touched the paint. The same paint I had watched Frank apply years ago under the dim light of our garage. He used to hum while he worked, an old blues song he never remembered the name of. Now I could almost hear it again, faint and ghostly in the back of my mind. Maggie crouched beside the Triumph, her brow furrowed. "Nothing. Not a damn thing." Bear's voice rumbled. "Maybe Dimitri already found it. Maybe it's gone." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Gone. Everything Frank risked his life for, everything he'd built. My phone buzzed. The sound sliced through the heavy quiet. I answered it without looking at the screen. "Mom." Derek's voice cracked on the other end, uneven and shaking. "Mom, I did something stupid." I froze. "Derek? What do you mean?" I kept one of the bikes. I didn't tell anyone. I thought maybe I could resell it for more later. I didn't mean—" The garage went silent. Everyone turned to me. My pulse thundered in my ears. I clenched the phone so tight it nearly slipped from my hands. "Which bike, Derek?" He hesitated. The pause felt like an eternity. "The Kawasaki," he whispered. Bear's eyes widened. "That's the one," he roared, his voice echoing through the garage like thunder. "Where is it?" I demanded. "Derek, where?" He was crying now, his voice breaking. "In my storage unit. Mom, I'm sorry, Where?" I shouted, my voice trembling with fury and fear and something deeper, something that hurt more than betrayal ever could. He gave me the address in broken syllables. I ended the call without another word. Bear was already moving. "We go now." Lisa looked at me, her face pale, lips pressed tight. "Mom, Derek's greed might have just saved Dad. Or killed him," I said softly. We drove through the night, the road stretching endlessly before us. The van hummed, a low vibration beneath my feet, but my thoughts were a blur, a whirlwind of memories, regret, and desperate hope. I remembered Frank teaching Derek how to ride a bike. Derek was only 12, nervous, wobbly, his small hands gripping the handlebars too tight. Frank had jogged beside him, laughing, calling out, "Don't fight the balance, son. Let it come to you." And now, years later, Derek was lost in the imbalance of his own choices. Lisa sat beside me, staring out the window. "I used to think Dad's bikes were his escape from us," she murmured. "But maybe they were his way of protecting us." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "He loved you both more than anything. He just didn't know how to show it in ways the world would understand." The miles rolled by, the desert shifting into shadowed emptiness. I watched the horizon, the faint glow of dawn threatening the darkness. Somewhere out there, my husband lay in a hospital bed, guarded by men who wanted him silenced. Somewhere, our son's selfish act had accidentally preserved the one thing that could expose the truth. When we finally reached the storage facility, the air was thick and still. A single light flickered above the entrance. Derek was already there, standing by the door, looking like a ghost of himself. His face was pale, his hair unkempt, his eyes red. "Mom," he whispered as I stepped out of the van. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I looked at him, at the boy I'd raised, the man he'd become, the mistakes that mirrored my own. "We don't have time for apologies," I said quietly. "Open it." His hands shook as he turned the key and rolled up the metal door. Inside, under a dusty tarp, gleamed the 1975 Kawasaki, green, polished, and heartbreakingly beautiful. Bear stepped closer, flashlight in hand. "There it is," he muttered. "Frank's last message." I swallowed hard, emotion tightening my chest. "Let's bring him home." As they started examining the bike, I stood back, watching the light catch on the chrome, remembering the day Frank first wheeled it out of the garage. He'd smiled at me. That same crooked smile that used to make me believe we could survive anything. And maybe, just maybe, we still could. The faint hum of approaching engines cut through the silence. Maggie's eyes darted toward the road. "We're not alone." Bear's jaw tightened. "Everyone, inside, now." My heart pounded as we pushed the bike deeper into the storage unit. I could already hear it, the unmistakable growl of motorcycles, Dimitri's men. Lisa gripped my arm, whispering, "Mom, what do we do?" I met her eyes. For the first time, I felt something stronger than fear. Resolve. "We finish what your father started." Outside, the engines roared closer. The light flickered again, and in that charged, breathless moment, I realized the truth. This wasn't just about Frank anymore. It was about all of us. about family, forgiveness, and the courage to rebuild what greed and fear had tried to destroy. The night air grew heavy, but inside me, something fierce had awakened. "Let them come," I said softly, almost to myself. "This time, they'll learn who they're dealing with." The Kawasaki sat in the middle of the storage unit, quiet and gleaming beneath a thin layer of dust. The air smelled of gasoline and rust, the kind of scent that used to cling to Frank's clothes when he came home late from the garage. For a moment, I couldn't move. My hands trembled at my sides as I stared at the bike, the last link to the man I loved and the secret he had nearly died protecting. Bear knelt beside it, flashlight cutting through the shadows. "It's untouched," he murmured. "No one's been here." His voice carried a mix of awe and urgency, the reverence of someone standing at a shrine. Maggie stood close behind him, lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes glistening in the dim light. Lisa hovered beside me, her hand brushing mine. "Mom," she whispered, "what if it's empty? What if we came all this way for nothing?" I swallowed the ache in my throat. "Then we'll still know we tried. But I don't think Frank ever did anything for nothing." Bear's fingers probed along the tank's edges, then froze. "Wait." He pulled a small screwdriver from his pocket and began working at something near the base of the gas tank. The soft scrape of metal filled the silence. A moment later, there was a faint click. He lifted the tank lid, revealing a narrow compartment, sealed tight with a metal plate. He pried it open carefully. Inside, wrapped in a small waterproof pouch, was a single black USB drive. For a heartbeat, none of us spoke. Then Bear exhaled, the sound trembling with disbelief. "This is it." The words hit me like lightning. I stepped closer, staring down at the tiny object that had cost us so much: peace, safety, trust. It was small enough to disappear inside a closed fist, yet it carried the weight of everything Frank had sacrificed. Maggie's voice was soft but certain. "He risked everything for this." I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. "Then we finish what he started." Bear set up his laptop on a metal crate, his fingers moving quickly. When he inserted the USB, the screen lit up with rows of folders, endless lines of digital proof. Inside were spreadsheets, encrypted files, photographs, recorded testimonies. Lisa leaned in closer, her eyes widening as she scrolled. Trafficking routes, bank transfers, shipping manifests. And then she froze. The next folder opened to reveal images, gritty, horrifying proof of the lives Kozlov's empire had destroyed. Faces of women and children, names, documents signed by shell companies, linked to politicians, businessmen, even law enforcement. I pressed a hand over my mouth, tears burning behind my eyes. "Oh, Frank," I whispered. "You were saving them." The room fell into heavy silence. Only the soft hum of the laptop broke it. Bear clenched his jaw, his eyes wet but unyielding. "We take it to the FBI, now." I nodded. "Yes, before anyone else dies for it." At that moment, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. My body tensed, but when the figure appeared in the doorway, it wasn't Kozlov's men. It was Derek. He looked smaller somehow, pale under the fluorescent light, his eyes swollen from crying. "Mom," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry." I stared at him, at my son, the boy I'd once cradled in my arms, the man who had nearly destroyed his father's life out of greed and ignorance. My chest ached, the pain twisting deep. "You'll apologize to your father," I said coldly, "if he wakes up." He flinched, and I saw the truth sink into him, the guilt, the shame, the realization that forgiveness would not come easily this time. We didn't waste another second. Bear packed the USB carefully and led the way out. The desert morning was breaking over the horizon as we drove toward the FBI field office, sunlight streaking through the windshield like gold ribbons. When we arrived, A woman in a navy blazer met us at the front entrance. She introduced herself as Agent Sarah Morrison. Her handshake was firm, but her eyes were kind, tired in the way that comes from seeing too much of the world's cruelty. Inside, we sat in a sterile conference room, the hum of fluorescent lights above us. Bear slid the USB across the table. Everything's on there. Kozlov's entire operation, the money, the people, the victims. Agent Morrison plugged it into her laptop and began scrolling through the files, her brows furrowed. "We've been after Kozlov for 8 years, she murmured, shaking her head. "If this is legitimate, it could bring down an entire network." "It's real," I said quietly. "My husband made sure of it. He almost died for this." She looked up, meeting my gaze. "Can you tell me where he is now?" "In the hospital. Intensive care. He had a stroke. Kozlov's men have been threatening him ever since." Her face hardened. "I'll have agents at the hospital within the hour. He'll be protected." The words hit me like a rush of air. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faint stir of relief, fragile and unfamiliar. I exhaled shakily. "It's over," I said aloud, more to myself than anyone else. "It's finally over." But the relief lasted only a heartbeat. Agent Morrison was still scrolling, her expression suddenly darkening. "Wait," she said softly. "There's more here." The tone of her voice pulled the air out of the room. I watched as her eyes scanned the screen, her hand moving over the mouse slowly. She clicked on a folder labeled Internal. A series of videos appeared, surveillance clips, secret recordings, payment receipts. She turned the laptop toward me. "Mrs. Patterson, your husband documented a police officer working directly for Kozlov." My pulse began to hammer. "Who?" She hesitated for just a second, then clicked on one of the videos. The grainy footage filled the screen. Frank, in the garage, talking to someone I knew too well. The man's voice was unmistakable, calm and easy, the same one that had toasted with us every Christmas, that had stood beside Frank at Derek's baptism. Officer Mike Patterson. My breath caught in my throat. My stomach twisted violently. "No," I whispered. "That can't be right. He's family." Agent Morrison's expression softened with pity. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson, but it's all here. Transfers to offshore accounts, communications with Kozlov's lieutenants. He was their eyes inside local law enforcement." Lisa gasped, covering her mouth. "Uncle Mike? He used to babysit us. He was—" Her voice broke, and tears welled up in her eyes. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. All those years, all those dinners, all those times, Frank came home quiet and tired after visiting Mike, saying nothing, but staring out the window as if trying to solve an invisible equation. He must have known. Bear clenched his fists, his voice low and rough. Frank didn't just fight Kozlov. He was surrounded by him. I couldn't breathe. My mind replayed the day Frank collapsed, the phone call that came minutes before, the stress etched into his face. He had found out then, hadn't he? That betrayal wasn't just from the outside. It had come from inside our home, wrapped in the voice of someone we trusted. Agent Morrison shut the laptop gently. "This evidence will change everything. Kozlov's entire web is collapsing, but you need to be careful. This revelation will make certain people desperate." I nodded numbly, my heart splitting between pride and anguish. Frank had carried this truth alone, protecting us from it, even when it broke him. Now it was in our hands, and I knew in that moment that our fight wasn't over. It had just reached the part where the real healing would begin, the part where justice meant facing not only the monsters outside, but the ones who had worn familiar faces all along. The room was sterile, almost oppressively so, and yet the air felt heavy with anticipation. Agent Morrison's words had barely settled in my mind before the weight of betrayal pressed down like a physical force. "Mike has been feeding information to Kozlov," she said slowly, each syllable deliberate, measured. My stomach twisted violently, and I felt as though the floor beneath me had disappeared. I gripped the edge of the table, nails biting into the surface, struggling to keep my body from shaking uncontrollably. "He knew about Frank's investigation," she continued. Another agent chimed in, his tone grim and clipped. "Mike arranged for Frank's room to be relocated at the hospital. It was supposed to protect him, but, clearly, it also gave Kozlov access." I pressed my hand to my chest. The stroke, his sudden collapse. Was it really a stroke? My voice was a whisper, trembling, as if saying it out loud would shatter the fragile thread of reality I was clinging to. The agents exchanged uneasy glances. "We're investigating," Agent Morrison said cautiously. "Kozlov has people who can induce medical emergencies. We can't rule it out." Rage erupted within me, raw and wild, a fire I had never known. It burned through every thought, every pulse of fear or sorrow. Mike. Mike had walked into our home countless times, laughing with Frank over dinners, exchanging small jokes, bringing gifts for the kids, sharing stories of his own life with that smug, familiar confidence. My husband had trusted him with everything, and all the while, he had been feeding our enemies, placing Frank's life in peril. I drew a shaky breath, trying to steady myself, trying to separate my heartbreak from my anger. "Where is he?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended, reverberating through the cold walls. "We're bringing him in now," Morrison replied calmly. Bear's hand landed on my shoulder, firm, grounding me. "Let the law handle it," he said, his eyes dark, burning with the kind of justice that had no patience for delay. I understood the warning in his gaze. Bikers had their own rules, their own justice, but my heart refused to settle for watching silently. "I want to face him," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor underneath. Every fiber of my being demanded confrontation, demanded acknowledgement of the betrayal that had wounded not only my husband, but our entire family. Morrison hesitated, a small crease of concern knitting her brow, before finally nodding. "The interrogation is in 1 hour. You can be present." When the time came, I sat behind the glass in the observation room, my hands tightly clasped, my mind a whirlwind of memories and imagined confrontations. Mike was brought in, his expression smug, confident, like he was stepping into a familiar stage where he controlled every line. He smiled faintly, leaning back in his chair as if this were merely another negotiation, another conversation to be managed, rather than a confession to be demanded. "You're making a mistake," he said smoothly, his voice carrying the ease of someone who had never truly faced consequence. But then, the evidence was laid before him. The USB, the photos, the records, Frank's meticulous documentation of every transaction, every conversation, every hidden account Mike had touched. His smugness faltered first, then cracked, then shattered. Pale swept across his face like a cold hand. His eyes darted, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Agent Morrison re-entered the room after a tense silence, turning her head toward him. "Mike, someone wants to see you." They opened the door for me. I stepped in, my legs shaking, but my resolve firm. Mike looked up, suddenly small, vulnerable, stripped of his pretense. He couldn't meet my eyes. "You tried to kill my husband," I said quietly, each word measured, controlled, yet heavy with the weight of my fury. "Brenda, I swear," he stammered, desperation leaking into his voice. "I just gave them information. I didn't know—" "You knew," I interrupted, my voice sharp, cold as steel. "Frank trusted you. We all did. You were supposed to be our friend." His shoulders sagged, the mask fully gone. I needed the money, my daughter's medical bills." My blood ran cold, but the words escaped me anyway. "Frank raised $2 million for sick children while you sold yours out," I said, each word a hammer of truth, hard, unyielding. My voice did not waver. It had to carry the weight of all the hurt and betrayal I had been storing, the anger and sorrow that had coiled in my chest for weeks. Mike broke then, entirely. The confession spilled out of him in a torrent of shame and excuses, with every detail captured on tape by the FBI. There was no room for escape, no place for denial. He had faced the consequences of his choices fully and utterly. Outside the room, Bear's hand rested on my shoulder again, this time in quiet solidarity. "Frank would be proud," he murmured, his voice low but unwavering. The fire in his eyes had softened into something like understanding, like reverence. Lisa's call came moments later, her voice quivering with hope and disbelief. "Mom," she said, breathless. "Dad." He moved his hand. "The doctors think he's waking up." I pressed the phone to my chest, tears streaming freely now, unrelenting, cleansing. Relief, love, grief, and hope all mingled together in a strange, beautiful chaos. The weight of fear lifted slightly, replaced by the fragile promise of recovery. I could almost hear Frank's quiet laugh in my mind, the soft murmur of reassurance he always gave me, the subtle pride he carried in his chest for everything he had built and protected. And for the first time in days, I let myself believe that our family could begin to heal, that justice had its due, and that Frank would see the truth of our love and devotion even through the haze of his hospital bed. The world outside the observation room remained heavy, but inside, a flicker of light had returned. The fight was not over, not yet, but the first steps toward redemption, understanding, and reconnection had begun. And I knew, with every pulse of my heart, that we would rise together, stronger, unbroken, and ready to face whatever came next. The room was sterile, almost oppressively so, and yet the air felt heavy with anticipation. Agent Morrison's words had barely settled in my mind before the weight of betrayal pressed down like a physical force. "Mike has been feeding information to Kozlov," she said slowly, each syllable deliberate, measured. My stomach twisted violently, and I felt as though the floor beneath me had disappeared. I gripped the edge of the table, nails biting into the surface, struggling to keep my body from shaking uncontrollably. "He knew about Frank's investigation," she continued. Another agent chimed in, his tone grim and clipped. "Mike arranged for Frank's room to be relocated at the hospital. It was supposed to protect him, but, clearly, it also gave Kozlov access." I pressed my hand to my chest. The stroke, his sudden collapse. Was it really a stroke? My voice was a whisper, trembling, as if saying it out loud would shatter the fragile thread of reality I was clinging to. The agents exchanged uneasy glances. "We're investigating," Agent Morrison said cautiously. "Kozlov has people who can induce medical emergencies. We can't rule it out." Rage erupted within me, raw and wild, a fire I had never known. It burned through every thought, every pulse of fear or sorrow. Mike. Mike had walked into our home countless times, laughing with Frank over dinners, exchanging small jokes, bringing gifts for the kids, sharing stories of his own life with that smug, familiar confidence. My husband had trusted him with everything, and all the while, he had been feeding our enemies, placing Frank's life in peril. I drew a shaky breath, trying to steady myself, trying to separate my heartbreak from my anger. "Where is he?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended, reverberating through the cold walls. "We're bringing him in now," Morrison replied calmly. Bear's hand landed on my shoulder, firm, grounding me. "Let the law handle it," he said, his eyes dark, burning with the kind of justice that had no patience for delay. I understood the warning in his gaze. Bikers had their own rules, their own justice, but my heart refused to settle for watching silently. "I want to face him," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor underneath. Every fiber of my being demanded confrontation, demanded acknowledgement of the betrayal that had wounded not only my husband, but our entire family. Morrison hesitated, a small crease of concern knitting her brow, before finally nodding. "The interrogation is in 1 hour. You can be present." When the time came, I sat behind the glass in the observation room, my hands tightly clasped, my mind a whirlwind of memories and imagined confrontations. Mike was brought in, his expression smug, confident, like he was stepping into a familiar stage where he controlled every line. He smiled faintly, leaning back in his chair as if this were merely another negotiation, another conversation to be managed, rather than a confession to be demanded. "You're making a mistake," he said smoothly, his voice carrying the ease of someone who had never truly faced consequence. But then, the evidence was laid before him. The USB, the photos, the records, Frank's meticulous documentation of every transaction, every conversation, every hidden account Mike had touched. His smugness faltered first, then cracked, then shattered. Pale swept across his face like a cold hand. His eyes darted, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Agent Morrison re-entered the room after a tense silence, turning her head toward him. "Mike, someone wants to see you." They opened the door for me. I stepped in, my legs shaking, but my resolve firm. Mike looked up, suddenly small, vulnerable, stripped of his pretense. He couldn't meet my eyes. "You tried to kill my husband," I said quietly, each word measured, controlled, yet heavy with the weight of my fury. "Brenda, I swear," he stammered, desperation leaking into his voice. "I just gave them information. I didn't know—" "You knew," I interrupted, my voice sharp, cold as steel. "Frank trusted you. We all did. You were supposed to be our friend." His shoulders sagged, the mask fully gone. I needed the money, my daughter's medical bills." My blood ran cold, but the words escaped me anyway. "Frank raised $2 million for sick children while you sold yours out," I said, each word a hammer of truth, hard, unyielding. My voice did not waver. It had to carry the weight of all the hurt and betrayal I had been storing, the anger and sorrow that had coiled in my chest for weeks. Mike broke then, entirely. The confession spilled out of him in a torrent of shame and excuses, with every detail captured on tape by the FBI. There was no room for escape, no place for denial. He had faced the consequences of his choices fully and utterly. Outside the room, Bear's hand rested on my shoulder again, this time in quiet solidarity. "Frank would be proud," he murmured, his voice low but unwavering. The fire in his eyes had softened into something like understanding, like reverence. Lisa's call came moments later, her voice quivering with hope and disbelief. "Mom," she said, breathless. "Dad." He moved his hand. "The doctors think he's waking up." I pressed the phone to my chest, tears streaming freely now, unrelenting, cleansing. Relief, love, grief, and hope all mingled together in a strange, beautiful chaos. The weight of fear lifted slightly, replaced by the fragile, fragile promise of recovery. I could almost hear Frank's quiet laugh in my mind, the soft murmur of reassurance he always gave me, the subtle pride he carried in his chest for everything he had built and protected. And for the first time in days, I let myself believe that our family could begin to heal, that justice had its due, and that Frank would see the truth of our love and devotion even through the haze of his hospital bed. The world outside the observation room remained heavy, but inside, a flicker of light had returned. The fight was not over, not yet, but the first steps toward redemption, understanding, and reconnection had begun. And I knew, with every pulse of my heart, that we would rise together, stronger, unbroken, and ready to face whatever came next. I flew through the hospital doors like the air itself was carrying me, my heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst. The antiseptic smell stung my nose, but I barely noticed. My eyes were locked on Frank's room at the end of the corridor, the thin curtain trembling slightly in the soft breeze of the air conditioning. I ran, my shoes slapping against the tiles, every step fueled by months of fear, anger, and hope finally coalescing into this single desperate moment. As I reached his bedside, his eyes fluttered open. They were faint, tired, clouded, yet unmistakably his. A raspy whisper escaped him, barely audible over the hum of the monitors. "Brenda." Tears blurred my vision. I collapsed into the chair beside him, gripping his hand, feeling the fragility and the strength all at once. I'm here. I'm here, baby, I sobbed, my voice trembling as it carried the weight of every sleepless night, every pang of guilt, every heartbeat spent worrying if I had failed him. The bikes. Did you? His words trailed off, uncertain, fragile, like the memory of a half-forgotten dream. Yes, Frank, I said, squeezing his hand gently. We found it, the evidence. Kozlov and Mike are going down. Relief washed across his face, softening the taut lines of fear and pain etched from his illness. His eyes narrowed slightly in confusion. How did you? I gave him a small, bittersweet smile, the kind that carries both exhaustion and quiet triumph. Your family, Frank. Your real family. The Iron Angels. They were with me every step. Over the next days, the rhythm of the hospital became our small, private world. Frank's recovery was painstakingly slow, each movement and each word a triumph. Bear and the club visited constantly, their presence a quiet, steady comfort that reminded me that the people Frank had touched, people whose lives he had changed without ever asking for recognition, were now standing with us, unwavering. One afternoon, Derek finally arrived. Shame radiated from him like heat from a fire. He avoided my eyes at first, then slowly lifted his gaze to Frank. Dad, I'm sorry. For everything, he whispered, his voice raw, heavy with regret. Frank studied him for a long moment, eyes clouded with fatigue but softening with understanding. You thought I was a failure, he said quietly, a statement filled with more sorrow than accusation. You're a hero, Derek whispered back, barely audible. I was blind. His eyes shimmered with unshed tears, the weight of his own recklessness and pride finally settling over him like a tangible shroud. No, Frank corrected him gently, his hand moving to rest on Derek's. I was absent. I let you think work was more important than you. I'm sorry, too. The admission hung in the air, fragile but freeing, like a bridge finally built between hearts that had been drifting apart. Lisa arrived shortly after, holding her children's small hands, their wide eyes full of wonder. Grandpa's famous! They exclaimed in unison, waving newspapers and online articles. The joy in their voices cut through the lingering tension, laughter, and innocence, mingling with the sterile hospital atmosphere, transforming it into something warm, something real. Agent Morrison visited next, a subtle smile breaking her usually professional demeanor. Kozlov was arrested in Miami, she said. Your evidence is putting away a dozen traffickers. Frank, you've done something extraordinary here. Frank turned to me later, private now, voice weak but curious. The bikes? I reached over and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead, the soft gesture carrying the weight of everything we had endured. Derek sold them, I explained gently. But Marcus Webb bought 3. He's donating them back to the charity auction. Frank's smile was small, tentative, but it reached his eyes. And the others? I swallowed hard, the memories of frantic searches and near misses still raw. Dmitri destroyed 2 looking for the evidence. 2 are gone. He blinked, then asked quietly, almost teasingly, The Kawasaki? I hesitated, then nodded. Derek kept it. That's how we found the evidence. Frank laughed, the sound raspy but genuine, and then winced from a twinge of pain. My son's greed saved the day? Accidentally, I replied, squeezing his hand back. I'm still furious with him, though. For a long moment, we sat together in quiet reflection, letting the relief and the joy wash over us, the room filled with the gentle hum of machines and the soft ticking of a clock marking our slow return to normalcy. Then, Frank's hand tightened around mine. Brenda, he said, voice earnest, there's something else. The charity auction next month, I need you to speak at it. I blinked, taken aback. Me? Frank, I can't. He shook his head gently, a weak but determined smile tugging at the corners of his lips. You saved everything. You're the biker's wife now. They need to hear your story. His words, simple and honest, carried the weight of everything we had endured, the fear, the pain, the courage it took to face unimaginable dangers. I realized then that being the biker's wife wasn't just about standing by him quietly. It was about standing up when it mattered most, about finding strength I didn't know I had, and about embracing the truth of who we were together. Tears blurred my vision again, but this time they were not only of sorrow, they were of pride, of hope, of unshakable love. I leaned closer, holding his hand like it was the most precious thing in the world. I'll do it, Frank, I whispered, for you, for all of us. And in that moment, with the weight of fear lifted and the promise of justice unfolding, I finally understood the quiet truth of our lives, that even ordinary people can rise to extraordinary courage, that love and loyalty can endure the darkest moments, and that the heart, once awakened, never forgets the meaning of heroism.